Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Rockville and Gaithersburg. Welcome to episode number 55 of Kibbitzing with Kagan. My special guest today is Jill Ortman-Fouse, a longtime community and education leader and former member of the Montgomery County Board of Education. Jill, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today.
Thank you so much. I am very proud to be among your esteemed guests after all of these episodes. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start with how we met. We go back to when you were on the board of the Faith and Politics Institute. You were on the staff, I was on the board, and we got to know each other in the mid-90s. Why don't you talk about the important work that the Faith and Politics does?
Faith and Politics is an extremely important organization now, just as much as it was then, because it brings together leaders that have different opinions on different issues and calls them to listen to their inner voices. So often, we know that people get distracted by what they hear in the media or what they hear from influencers or whatever. And they lose track of why they sought those positions and what they wanted to accomplish with those positions. And when they get off track, their mission can falter. And so often, even when we disagree with each other, we actually do have common goals. And so the purpose of the organization was to bring people together, Congress people, staffers, and talk about the issues they were struggling in and find that common ground. In fact, common ground was one of the names of the big projects, initiatives that they had.
Absolutely. So we recently lost the great Congressman John Lewis, who was a former president of the Faith and Politics Institute. What about his soul, his political history and personal history most inspired you?
Everything. I think, I first learned about his lunch counter protest when I was in college, and I had followed him ever since then. So when then I had the opportunity to work for an organization that he had a very strong role in, I leapt at that chance, and he guided the organization with tremendous vision and courage and a faithfulness that I think was really drew people in towards that mission.
Mm-hmm. So Faith and Politics, Doug Tanner, its founder, a Methodist minister, used to say that we can disagree without being disagreeable. And I've heard some other people say that over the years, but frankly, not with the same genuineness and passion that Doug had. So it was a real honor to be on the board for almost 10 years.
And there's so few organizations that are nonpartisan, that bring in people from both sides of the aisle to work on common issues. So few opportunities for them to do that. It's a really unique organization.
Yes. So Jill, I should tell you that I have a million questions for you, and I'm so excited about this conversation. So let's pivot before we get into education. You've done a lot of consulting for businesses, for nonprofits, for individuals. Why don't you just talk about the sort of work that you've done over the years and how you feel like you've been able to make a difference?
Well, I do feel like the work that we did in Faith and Politics sort of set that course, because my work is about bringing people together to accomplish their missions in a more effective way. In a way that hears everybody's voices. People have different perspectives. It doesn't mean that they're better or worse than other perspectives. And we can all learn from each other. And so that's the goal, has been the goal of my work with everything from local nonprofits to international aid organizations, is to provide the opportunities and facilitate the opportunities to understand people's perspectives and collaborate in a way that gets them to the end goal faster.
Yes. So now pivoting to education, which is your passion and so much of how you are known. You started off as an activist. You had 2 kids in the public schools. Talk about your leadership in the community before you ever ran for the school board.
Well, so many people come to me now. I get texts and messages all the time. I have a friend moving to the area. She wants to move to a neighborhood with a good school. Can you give her some advice, or can you give him some advice? And truth be told, with all of my deep commitment to education, when we moved to our area, I didn't look at schools at all. I just looked at sort of the mindset and the vibe of the neighborhood. You know, I went to open houses and I talked to people, and there were a lot of families, and I wanted to live in a neighborhood with a lot of families, so that my kids would have, you know, people in the neighborhood to play with. And they all seemed to be, or somebody that I met were felt the same way I did, just generally about service and the greater good. And just by the nature of their work, whether they were federal employees or worked for educational institutions or nonprofits. And I really felt like very comfortable here. And then the year before my daughter was supposed to start kindergarten, the PTA president reached out to me and said, well, could you get on the school improvement team? And I said, well, my daughter hasn't even started there yet. And she said, it would be great if you just jumped right in. And so I did that summer and went to the training for the school improvement team. And then I became PTA president, and was PTA president again. And the thing that I realized is that we had this just amazing, diverse school, amazing school. It was what's called a Title I school because of the level of poverty in the school. But I didn't understand why more neighbors weren't invested in this school, why they were choosing other schools. And it turned out it was because of this label, which didn't, like I said, didn't make any sense to me. So I set as my role as PTA president, and then later as neighborhood association president, to really introduce people to the gifts of going to this school, to the amazing students and wonderful staff. And I feel that my kids benefited so much from being in that environment. I benefited so much from being in that environment. And it did turn out that the neighbors started choosing this school much to the point that we actually lost our Title I status, which was difficult in terms of funding. It was good to see that the neighborhood was committing to this school, which is so important.
So let's pivot to you deciding to run for the Board of Education. What did you think you could do that as a school board member that you couldn't do as a community leader?
I had been advocating on a number of different issues for our more diverse schools, for our higher poverty schools, because I had friends all over the county, and we would talk about the different opportunities, the different supports, the different services, the different options that they had. Even their school facilities were very different. And that didn't seem fair. It seemed like a basic fairness issue. And because of my work with Faith and Politics, and especially the Racial Justice Project of Common Ground, I was knowledgeable in how these disparities play out in schools all across the country, and that Montgomery County was not unique. And my advocacy seemed to keep hitting this brick wall because I was on this side of the table. And I thought, if I really want to make a difference on these issues and get this data and get people to talk about this stuff, I need to get on the other side of the table.
Yep. Well, I was so proud to endorse you and work my butt off telling everyone who would listen that they had to vote for Jill Ortman-Fouse. So once you got there, tell me briefly, what most impressed and surprised you, and what did you find most frustrating?
I think what surprised and impressed me was how I knew we had a lot of people who were knowledgeable in my neck of the woods, who had a lot of expertise from their jobs, like I say, as educators, as working with nonprofits, organizers. And then I found that we had those folks all over the county. I mean, we had just literally people that were consulting with school systems all over the county, but our own school system wasn't listening to them. And I found that to also be the most frustrating part of the job, that we were leaving our greatest resource, our community members, on the table, who had so much expertise and willingness to help, because they wanted to make their schools better for their kids, if not all kids. And then, so that was something that I tried to work on in many different ways while I was on the board.
So talk about the achievement gap, and and the difference. So I was lucky I went K through 12 and through our public schools, and I was in one of the W clusters. I went to Winston Churchill, very proud Bulldog, but certainly the difference between Whitman, Wooten, Churchill, and those, and some of the other schools around the county is pretty significant.
Yeah, well, and we were very fortunate to have those schools because the communities have invested many resources, time, talent, and treasure in helping those schools to be as successful as they can. In other parts of the county, families would love to be able to be as involved in their schools and give as much of their time, treasure, and talent, but they just don't have the capacity. What we found out from COVID was these are dramatic differences between those that have and those that don't have as much, from the thousands of people facing eviction, from food insecurity doubling, from unemployment going up, and it shone a bright light on these disparities of families outside of the school, which absolutely impact everything that happens in these schools.
No question. So you mentioned housing security, food insecurity, and basically the poverty that is in so many neighborhoods around our county. Talk about the digital divide, because certainly students who couldn't get access to the internet reliably couldn't learn from home during COVID.
So this is something that I advocated for while I was on the board. Other school districts, or even in Maryland, had what's called a one-to-one program so that every student would have a device. And I knew that MCPS was not willing to do that. But I said, even if we could have a loaner program through our schools so that kids could check out devices. I was told that students could not be trusted with those devices if they brought them home. And I was also told that devices were so cheap now that every student could afford them. And our Minority Scholars program is just an outstanding program. And the students shared with me that they had friends who didn't have devices, that they were doing their own fundraisers to raise money for devices. And I brought this back to the staff, and I still couldn't get anywhere. It was extremely frustrating because they believed one thing and the reality was telling something quite another. And then COVID hit, and we found out that we did have tens of thousands of students that didn't have the devices that they need. My own kids had been telling me that growing up, when they would do group projects and they would get a lower grade on their group project, and they would say, well, my teammates don't have these computers with these apps and these things to make their presentations fancy and to do the PowerPoints.
Right.
They don't have access to that. And it's just another fairness issue. And because Montgomery County Public Schools concentrate poverty on the backs of our African and American students at our highest poverty schools, and then if we look, and all of this stuff I knew anecdotally before getting on the board, but then I started looking through all the reports from the Office of Legislative Oversight and other data studies, Urban Institute, and they all showed this data over and over again, from after school programs to arts exposure to which schools have the most first year teachers, which I brought up in another board meeting, more than one, that it seemed as though our highest poverty schools had the most first year teachers. And I was told repeatedly, that's a good thing because they have the most enthusiasm. And I was like, you're talking about kids that have complex issues. Like we need to have seasoned educators that know all the tools in the toolbox when you're throwing new teachers into this who don't have the support they need. That's problematic. If we are putting brand new teachers into these situations of concentrated poverty and needs, we need to make sure we're giving them every tool and support possible.
Right. So talk specifically. So English language learners are a real focus of mine, because both Gaithersburg and Rockville are two of the most linguistically diverse municipalities in the nation. But talk, if you would, about other special populations. Talk also about gifted and talented, special needs students, and others, and whether you think MCPS is addressing what they need.
Well, first, I do want to just mention about our English language learner, bilingual, multilingual population, which is an asset. My colleague and I.
And they're more expensive to educate if they're speaking another language at home and come here without English skills. it's really hard to start engaging them. And I've been to some of those schools and spoken to the kids in their language. It's a challenge.
And that's why you need to have these support structures, which I could go on forever about those. And
but we don't have time for that.
But we don't have time for that. I'll just tell one quick anecdote that visited Gaithersburg High School, met with students as part of the Liberty's Promise program. And we probably had 50 students in this classroom squeezed in. This is while I was still on the board. And I said to them through a translator, because my Spanish is not as good as I would like it to be. How many of you have tutors? And they didn't know what a tutor was. And I said, how many of you have, and I said, tutor is someone who helps you with your work. And I said, how many of you have parents who can help you with your work? And very few of them, because their parents were working, their parents did not speak English as a first language, whatever their educational, whatever their issues were, this was not, they couldn't do it. And I said, well, how many of you, if you had the opportunity to get a tutor, to get someone to help you so that you could do better academically, would do it? Every hand,
of course.
It wasn't that these kids didn't want to try or weren't committed to school or didn't want to do better. It was that they didn't have the resources they needed. That barrier was there, and we needed to take them over that barrier.
So
you mentioned about special education needs and also gifted and talented. We have, there's so much I could say about both of these. As far as our highly gifted learners, we have highly gifted learners at all of our schools all over the county. We do have special programs for them, but I am a big fan of opening the doors, not closing them and only letting a few kids in. I'm a big fan of universal design for learning, which allows a choice of opportunities for the challenge for a student. So if you're getting bored and you want to take on more challenge, take on more challenge. If you want to work with a group that's going at a slower pace so you can figure things out, go with that, where you have classes that work with each other to provide those opportunities for kids. I also am a big fan of the way they do magnets around the country, which is probably around 80%, very different than we have here. It isn't an application process where you have to be the best in your class. You have to have the interest, and you have to show that you have done the work to be able to get into these programs. Why would we not want to have as many programs as we could for kids who want more challenge? Why would we want to say, out of all of you high achievers, we're just going to select these few and you're going to have the opportunity for this magnet? It doesn't make any sense to me, and it doesn't make any sense for most of the country.
Right. Montgomery County is looking for a new superintendent. Dr. Jack Smith was with us for a number of years, having come from the state to Montgomery County, and he has moved on for personal reasons. Tell me what you think the school board should be looking for in our next superintendent. And we have an acting superintendent in Dr. Monifa McKnight, who I knew when she was a principal in my district.
Yes.
But talk to me just the principals, no pun intended, the principal characteristics that we should.
Well, I can tell you that we interviewed a lot of candidates when I was on the board. Unfortunately, that process was bigger than just myself. Sure. But there are characteristics that I saw that I believe would be highly valued for this county, and chief among them is being a good partner and communicator. This just goes back to what I said at the beginning, that you're not going to find a place in the county with a more diversity or more brilliance that you could be taking advantage of, celebrating, and using as our greatest resource for your kids. And someone who is able to do that, capture that, and share it with all is a winner in my book. Nice. Communications has always been a struggle for MCPS. It's a struggle right now as we're getting ready for another school year of unknowns. Right. We have parents who have so many questions. And even if you don't know the answers, just saying, we hear you. Yeah. We don't have the answers yet. This is what we're working on. Tell us what you want to see. And if you have questions, and we'll respond, but understand, we're all in this together. And we really want to be responsive to the needs that you're lifting up.
Can I just say how lucky I feel to live in a county where there is not a big debate about whether kids should be wearing masks, and there are no threats from elected officials that if you make kids wear masks, then I'm not going to pay you. And I mean, the insanity of some of that when we should be thinking about public health for our kids and what they could be bringing home from school, even if they're asymptomatic, is just nuts.
Right. We're not immune to those influences in our community, folks that have demanded that we not have masks in school, or we don't follow good public health protocol, which is unfortunate, but our leaders have stood strong. In fact, our constituents, our school staff are asking for even more. They would, what we are hearing is that they would like to have mandatory vaccination for our school staff and students over 12. There are districts across the country that have taken those measures.
Right.
And if you really want to keep your most vulnerable population safe, of which a third of our students, over 50,000 students in Montgomery County schools, are more vulnerable because they have the least resources, which comes into play certainly with healthcare and their families being dependent on their jobs and their livelihood, housing always being in flux. We can't afford to take chances with that population, especially when we say our progressive ideals are that we do lift up the least of these in our community.
Yes. So you talked about the extremists on masks, and I was going to get to that later, but let's talk about trolls. You have, throughout your tenure as a county leader, just been so wonderfully outspoken, and that obviously provokes the haters and the critics. How do you deal with that?
I think I try to have perspective. As they say, it's just words. And that's all it is. And I just, as we said back in Faith and Politics, we just have to keep the eyes on the prize. We have to keep fighting for the last, the littlest, and the least of these. And so many other people have endured so much worse, which we learned about together and in the social justice work that I've done. Jailings, beatings, it's just, discriminatory laws that people's trolling attacks should be the least of my concerns. Does it get to me sometimes? Yes, because I get frustrated because,
Sure.
I get frustrated. I just feel like you could be using your power for good instead of this. And,
right.
and they don't, clearly a lot of really intelligent people that could be part of the solution instead of
Right.
part of the problem. And the biggest thing is people that want to criticize all the time, but when you offer them a seat at the table or you give them the opportunity for solutions, they have nothing to share. They just want to attack.
Yep. Been there, done that. I get it.
Right. And unfortunately, it wears on the school system too, because when the school system hears criticism, it sort of gets looped. And I know this as a board member in with all of these other attacks.
Yeah.
So you can't discreetly hear the constructive critiques in this pool of constant attacks. It does make it really difficult for us to be successful.
Yep. Let's pivot for a moment to the state, since that's my home turf now. First off, we have a new state education superintendent. Thank you for that. I'm so grateful for that. So Dr. Chowdhury, any thoughts or hopes or expectations? And then we'll get to the Kirwan Commission.
Yes, I have not spoken with the new superintendent yet. I would love to. I'm very hopeful. I, like you, and I'm not gonna mask it. I do think we needed a change. It was extremely frustrating in many ways with our former state superintendent on many issues. And I do feel
she was not the most collaborative, open-minded person I've ever had to work with.
In many ways. And I found that, so, I found that as a board member in my interactions, and then, since then. So I'm hopeful with the new superintendent, reading what he's written and his positions, I am hopeful. The Maryland State Department of Education, I'm still frustrated with their secretary. I just feel like we could be taking stronger stands on this. The lack of mask guidance for schools throughout the state, leaving it up to the districts, puts everybody in an extremely complicated and difficult position. And that's not leadership.
Right. There's always a tension at the state level between trying to create statewide policy and acknowledging the importance of local control. And so balancing that has been a struggle, frankly, when to let the locals lead and when we should say, thou shalt do this because it's important.
Right. If it's, I'm just going to mention that when it's your local holidays that you celebrate in your community,
yes,
let the school districts be in charge of that.
Yeah. Including Labor Day, including Labor Day.
But when it is a public health matter,
yeah,
I just can't understand why you would not want everyone following the best public health protocol to keep us safe when it's a matter of life and death. And we've already lost thousands of lives.
Sure. So just in case a viewer doesn't recall what I'm referencing on Labor Day, the 24 local counties always used to decide their own calendar. That's one of the most important powers or authorities of the local boards of education. Which religious holidays do we close school for, and what is our local calendars and teacher planning days and all that. And then Governor Hogan, supported by Comptroller Peter Franchot, really started putting out schools shouldn't be allowed to start before Labor Day, which just shortened the number of possible snow days and lengthened the school year into June, further into June, all of that shortened December holiday break. I hated
it was out of sync with school systems across the country and the preparation that they do for their students to be able to go on to that next level of learning.
Yes.
It put a burden on families. I heard from so many families
of course
with higher needs that they had to have additional care during the summer, which became more expensive because college students had all gone back to school and they didn't have the counselors available. I mean, it created so many issues.
Comptroller Franchot used to say, oh, well, let's let families have another week at the beach. It was like, not everyone can afford the week at the beach. What are you thinking? Frustrating. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the Kirwan Commission, also known as the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. It's something that colleagues and education experts around the state worked on for many years, led by University of Maryland Chancellor Britt Kirwan. Why don't you talk about what you're most hopeful and excited about with the multi-year rollout of the Kirwan plan?
Well, there's so much to talk about, but I know you want me to keep this as brief as possible. But I think in essence, it was getting everybody on the same page with best practices that have not just worked nationally, but internationally, to give our kids, all of our kids, but especially our most vulnerable kids, the support that they need, and also to make sure that we are attracting and keeping the best educators in the country, which is foundational. Any research that you do, the biggest difference in a child's education is the teacher that you put in front of them. Of the things that you can put into a school building, it's the educator in front of them.
Right.
And it's really making that position, the valued position, the professional position that it should be. And providing for the kinds of things that you need for schools that have concentrated poverty, so smaller class sizes, being able to have them as community centers where you can invite families in, because that's another thing that we've learned as a best practice is when a school is a hub in a higher needs community, so you can get your healthcare there.
Right.
You can learn about community events. You can have this kind of partnerships. We have a linkages to learning program here, which is an excellent model of that community partnership in a small number of the schools, but we don't have the funding to be able to spread it to all the schools that we need. And there's quite a bit of money attached to this legislation, and that hopefully will make a huge difference for Montgomery County if we can access it the way we need to.
Yes. Yep. Good. So let's touch for a second. You ran for the Montgomery County Council at large, did a great job. The top 4 get elected and you fell just short. Talk about the campaign and your desire to shift to the county council.
So after I had decided to leave the Board of Education for a longer story, which I won't get into now, and run for the county council, it was because I had already attended a lot of county council forums. And we had quite a number of people that were running. And what I found in these forums is that there was a lot of misinformation being spread that was really frustrating for me. And I thought, if I can just get into these forums and use it as a platform to give accurate information
Yes.
about the populations in our county, about our resources, about our school system. That will be a gain, I think. So, of course, I went in it to win, but at the same time, I was trying to build as many relationships as I could with people who wanted better outcomes for all kids in Montgomery County, which lead to better outcomes for everyone in Montgomery County.
Well, as in your Board of Ed campaign, I was a very strong and enthusiastic supporter, and I just think you would have been an extraordinary asset to the county council. Brief question, and I hope the answer is going to be right. Might you ever run for office again in the future? Because at this point, you're not running for anything in 2022.
I am not running for anything. I get asked that frequently, but my focus right now is actually, I work for Council President Tom Hucker, and supporting his work. And I feel like I'm making a difference in this position. He believes in the same goals and missions I do, and I'm still, collaborating with people on the Board of Education and MCPS. And
so, in the future, you could run again for something. Yes. The correct answer is yes. Never close the door, right? We need you.
I know this is what you always tell me. It's not on my plate, but you always tell me to keep that door open.
Keep the door open.
I always appreciate your support. Thank you, Jill.
Absolutely. I adore you and have such the highest level of respect for you, Jill. So just one more question before we get to our Fast Five. As you indicated, you're working for Council Member Tom Hucker, who has established an exploratory. David Blair, who lost by like this much, it was like 70 votes or something, is challenging Mark Elrich. Hans Remer, Councilmember Hans Remer, is running against Mark Elrich. Talk to me, if you would, about how you think Mark Elrich has been as our county executive for the last 3 years.
Well, I mean, I've known Mark for a very, very long time, and we have felt the same about progressive issues. I do know that we've been through challenging times. I'm friends with all of these candidates, and I've actually known all of them, except for I haven't known David Blair as long, but I have known the others for a long time. And my goal is to just make sure, as anyone is running for these offices or others, that they are listening to the expertise of our community and being good collaborators and working together for the best future coming out of COVID. This has been a very difficult time for our businesses, for our communities, for our residents. For our nonprofits, absolutely, for our nonprofits. And we really need to make sure that we've got folks who can get the job done in these positions and will work really hard and strategically and collaborate well to get those goals met.
So again, before we go to the Fast Five, is there anything in 1 minute that you'd like to say that I haven't asked you about?
Well, I just really appreciate you being such a good partner over all of these years and reaching out to me when you have educational questions. And it's been wonderful to be a friend of yours and also a co-collaborator on many different issues. So I just, in admiration of your extraordinary service for so many years in your leadership. So thank you.
Thank you. That was not the setup. But I'll take it. That's very kind. Thank you, Jill. So, Jill Ortman-Fouse.
Yes.
5 quick questions, quick answers to let folks know a little bit more about you. Number 1, what makes you laugh?
A lot. My family, my kids. I am fortunate to live with a family that has an extremely good sense of humor, and it gets you through everything. I think that's the most important quality there. Is my entire family makes me laugh all the time. They're all brilliantly funny.
That's great. What is something that makes you most angry?
People's misconceptions about those that have less monetary resources. I think that makes me the absolute most frustrated. The way people in our community judge those by whatever their background is and don't give them the opportunities they deserve. It's tragic.
Tell us about a hobby that you took on during COVID, something you changed during the last year and a half.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll tell you, my family took on a lot. And I think my hobby ended up just spending time with my family.
Okay.
Over so many years since my kids started school, I've been in all these different leadership positions for these different boards and groups and organizations. And as you know, Cheryl, I've attended every event I could all over this county.
Yes.
For so many years, days, weekends, and nights. I actually didn't spend as much time with my family as I feel like I just feel like I missed out on a lot. And the gift of COVID, if there can be a gift,
right?
You know, the yin and the yang,
yes,
was just spending evenings eating dinner with my family,
nice.
Watching a series, laughing together. It's been an incredible opportunity.
It's wonderful. Question number 4. If you could travel anywhere in the world and money were no object, where would you want to go?
Right now we're talking about Hawaii. Would be great. That we'd love to go to Hawaii. We've never been there, but you know, that's like, you know, the pie in the sky. So
that's great. Hawaii is amazing. And the 5th question, Jill, the question that I ask every one of my guests: what, Jill Ortman-Fouse, is your secret superpower? What is a talent or skill that you have that most folks don't?
I don't know if most folks don't know it, but I think my superpower is just connecting people. It's a lot of people reach out to me, as I say, who have all kinds of skills, talents, suggestions. And I know other people who are working on those same issues, and just connecting them together because the whole is bigger than the sum of their parts. And I love watching those efforts blossom and turn into real action. And I think that has been probably my greatest gift that I've been able to contribute.
I love that. So Jill Ortman-Fouse, thank you for your time. Thank you for setting aside in your crazy busy schedule the opportunity to kibitz today. I think you're amazing, and Montgomery County is very, very lucky to have had you as a leader and to continue to have you as a leader now and hopefully for many, many, many years to come.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. I really appreciate the time. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Take care. Stay safe. See you soon.
You too. Stay safe, everybody. Bye.